Welcome to the Navseam podcast, where classical gourmands everywhere can finally get their fill. Join us for a delectable discussion of Greco-Roman civilization stretching from the Minoans and Mycenaeans through the Renaissance and right down to the present. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here are your hosts, Dr. David Noe and Dr. Jeff Winkle.
Welcome, Ad Nauseam listeners, to episode 93 of the podcast. It's a sunny, balmy summer morning in mid-August here in West Michigan.
Yeah.
And I am... Go ahead.
No, I'm just agreeing with you.
With the yeah? And I am in Vomitorium South, here deep in the bunker, with my good friend and fabulous co-host, Dr. Jeffrey T. Winkle. How are you, Jeff?
I'm doing great. I'm recently back from a kind of a week away up in the beautiful north country of our home state of Michigan. Mm-hmm. And so I'm feeling relaxed and ready.
Wonderful.
Although, as I was just telling you before we hit the record button, is I'm definitely ready for my boys to get back to school.
Okay.
And I'm ready for kind of the regular rhythms of a semester.
Yeah.
And a little bit more contemplative time.
Oh.
Yeah. A little bit more time to kind of work on projects and kind of do my own thing. And but that's just around the corner, and I'm looking forward to it immensely.
All right.
Yeah.
And are we going to return to the once per week release of podcast episodes? That's our ambition, right?
That's my hope. It really depends on you, Dave.
What?
I find that you're kind of the one that's kind of harder to pin down.
Really?
Yeah, you got your hands and feet in so many different things. You're running around and you're making that scratch.
Right.
And you're
I thought you were going to say I got my hands in so many pies. But then when you added feet, that just conjured up the
well, part of the problem
wrong.
is that you have your feet in the pies as well.
Okay.
And it just complicates things. So I'm ready. I'm ready for a once a week.
So it's my fault is what you're saying.
Basically, I'm saying that.
Okay.
So, but I'm hoping that we can nail down something, maybe even after we're done today.
Yeah.
And we can give the audience a more regular output. Right? Summer's been a little bit lax, hasn't it?
It has been tough to produce the same amount of content because there's so many changes going on in our lives, you know? Seems like there's some pop song I could introduce here. Changes?
Yeah, David Bowie.
That's David Bowie.
Yeah.
I thought that was Iggy Stardust. Ziggy Stardust.
Ziggy Stardust is an alter ego of
the late
David Bowie.
The late David Bowie,
yes,
right?
They are one and the same.
Oh, same person.
Same person, yes. Right. So I believe it was in the persona of Ziggy Stardust that he wrote and recorded that song. I could be wrong, but I think that's right. So we're both right.
When it comes to pop culture, you're always right. There's no doubt. So let's move on to the episode today.
Yeah, let's do it.
Are you going to ask how I'm doing?
I am. I was just about to, but you jumped ahead. So Dave, how are you doing?
Fine. So we'd like to talk today more about Vergil's Aeneid.
Yes, we're going to get to, or hopefully going to close out book 4.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So in many cases, I think a lot of people would say this is in some ways a dramatic high point of the entire epic. So we're going to go through that. Maybe get a little bit into book 5.
I think so.
Yeah. I've really been enjoying kind of rereading the Aeneid.
It's incredible.
It's been a few years since I've been in it, but I'm seeing so much more in this. And so when you think about it from the point of view of, I'm not really teaching a class. I gotta kind of find some insights and find new ways to look at this for our audience. It just makes it for a much more interesting read.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I'm with you. It's the Fastigium Operis.
Fastigium opera. What,
Operis. It's the high point of the work.
Oh, okay.
So
Fastigium.
Far. Fastigium.
I don't know that one.
Yeah, Fastigium, Apex. These are Summa. These are synonyms.
Gotcha.
Speaking of shout outs, we have one, and this is a nice one. This is really nice. And I think we should read the majority of it because
agree.
This gentleman put a lot of work into it. So this shout out goes to Father David Pelican. And Father Pelican says, I am a Catholic priest serving at Divine Child, a parish and K-12 school in Dearborn, Michigan. Fellow Michigander.
All right.
He says, I am also an avid lover of the Latin language and recently spent a week at a canoculum where we spoke Latin exclusively. We have a robust Latin program in our high school, which I support in any way I can. I am able to periodically celebrate Mass in Latin for interested students as well. For any Latin Rite Catholic, the language is integral. Did I pronounce that right?
I think so. Yeah.
It's not integral?
Integral.
Integral to our ecclesiastical tradition. But it is also important to me because I have a deep appreciation for the classics. Your podcast has been a helpful way for me to pursue my love of the classics in the midst of ministry.
That's really interesting. I mean, this sounds like your kind of guy. He spent a
Latin speaker.
A Latin speaker.
Absolutely.
That's great. But it made me kind of, as you were reading this, it made me wonder if there's often that disconnect that a place might have kind of a robust Latin program, but that doesn't necessarily come with kind of a deep appreciation for the classics.
Well, that's true.
It can be more narrow.
You're right. And in fact, just before coming here, I was doing some research, some study for a future episode, Carl Richard's book on the golden era of classics in the United States.
Yeah.
So here's a spoiler alert, I guess. We're going to be covering that book. We covered the founders and the classics about a year ago for our July 4 episode.
That's right.
And then we're going to have Carl Richard on the show as a guest.
Fantastic, yeah.
And he was talking about this very thing, that in 19th century pedagogy, not to give away too much, but in 19th century pedagogy, there were some people who said the only point in reading Latin is mastering grammar. And then there was a reaction to that, led by Basil Gildersleeve and others, who said, no, you got to appreciate the people and the culture. And it was like listening to Winkle, actually, because it's right up your alley.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic.
You got to really learn to appreciate them as a people with real interests and desires and failings, and the language is subservient to that or supportive of that.
Right.
It's not an end in itself.
Right. So yeah, I'm here. I think that's in some ways you're kind of almost translating what Father Pelican is saying here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You want to continue with that second paragraph?
Yeah. So he goes on. He says, I first discovered Ad Nauseam when it was just beginning. I believe it was advertised in emails from Latin Per Diem. The best free resource I know of to keep one's Latin skills fresh. So a nice little plug for you,
Yeah, I didn't pay him to say that.
Ad Nauseam is the only podcast I have listened to every episode of. Man, this guy's
That's really
a super
nice.
fan. That's
really
awesome.
nice.
Yep. He says, your blend of humor and insight and ability to deliver exceptional content in a laid-back manner keep me eagerly waiting for the next episode to drop. I have especially appreciated the more in-depth series on the classical works. The Aeneid episodes, which are right in the middle of right now, have been great thus far. And when the Odyssey series came out, I reread the book as I listened to those episodes. It's exactly what we hope our audience will do.
That is incredibly gratifying. To think that we have, I know this is going to sound like self-praise, but to think that we have encouraged people to read the classics, that's very gratifying.
Yeah. He goes on to say that he got the Lombardo translation of the Odyssey from Hackett, and he used our generous coupon code. You'll hear more about that soon.
Right.
And he thanks us for our dedication to making the classics accessible to all, and he's continually recommending our podcast to people he knows.
Yeah. Thank you, David.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much for being an avid listener and a supporter. And he adds here at the end a nice suggestion for a future topic for an episode, and we're going to take that very seriously. So thanks for keeping the torch lit out there with the teaching of Latin.
Yeah, fantastic. We got our opening quote here.
Yes.
Can I do this one?
Yeah, I think you ought to. Yep.
I hunted this down. I mean, this wasn't, I don't want to give the audience the impression this is, something I was casually reading.
Right.
But when I was rereading the section for today from Book 4, with Dido's suicide, one of the things that jumped out to me was the manner in which she kills herself. Right. She builds this funeral pyre, climbs on top, and stabs herself to death, right? And it struck me as kind of odd. And I was thinking along the lines of, how does this compare to, other, particularly feminine deaths in the classical canon? And I wondered, why did Vergil have her die this way? So I actually went back. I kind of used that as kind of a search term in JSTOR, looking for an article. And this article popped up. And I found this guy, R.T. Edgeworth,
right,
who basically asked the same question.
That's a great name, by the way.
Edgeworth?
Edgeworth.
It doesn't even sound real.
Wouldn't you like to have that name?
Edgeworth. It sounds like
Jeffrey T. Edgeworth.
It sounds like a supervillain, maybe.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, something.
What would be the opposite of Edgeworth? Stuck. Are you stuck? I'm stuck too. Opposite of edge. The opposite of edge is like center.
Yes, center.
And the opposite of worth is, I don't know. Cut. Okay, continue on.
So this is the quote. This comes from an article, "The Death of Dido," from Classical Journal, way back in the mid 1970s. He writes, "Why does Dido meet death atop a funeral pyre? Critics of the Aeneid, for the most part, have failed to notice the apparent incongruity of this important detail of Dido's death scene, and accordingly have not sought an explanation for the incongruity. Death on a pyre sounds like a Agatha Christie title, right?
Yes, it does.
On a pyre, right?
It doesn't sound like the Hardy Boys.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. No, Death on a pyre is certainly not what one would have expected for Vergil's Dido. The canonical mode of suicide for heroines in classical literature, particularly for tragic queens, is death by hanging. You have Antigone, Jocasta, Phaedra, Cleite in Apollonius Rhodes Argonautica, Amata in the Aeneid coming up.
Book 12, right?
Book 12, yep. Death by poison would have been an unmistakable reference to Cleopatra, But Cleopatra is not in the forefront of the poet's consciousness during the death scene. And the element of suicide is entirely absent from the figures of Ariadne and Medea, two of the principal models for Dido. So I laid the question out there. Now, I'll give you, when we get to the scene, I'll give you Edgeworth's answer to this, which I think was really interesting and something I'd never thought of before. And I'm hoping that you and I can kind of add our own thoughts as to kind of why this is the manner and location of Dido's death.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I do have a question here about Cleopatra. Quote, Cleopatra is not in the forefront of the poet's consciousness during the death scene. So my previous reading and research on this book 4, has been that Cleopatra is the model generally for Dido, specifically with interaction as Aeneas as Antony. So is he suggesting that Dido is a model? I'm sorry, Cleopatra is a model for Dido for most of the book, but in the death scene, Vergil adopts a different approach.
This is the very beginning of the article. So my sense is that he's arguing that Cleopatra is not a model at all. I thought kind of just this next thing with that last sentence there, that just saying that Ariadne is a model for Dido, as if that's just kind of, that's known, that's factual. That kind of also struck me as kind of Medea. Yeah. Oh, I totally get the Medea, the connection, but Ariadne is. Except
in terms of the character of Medea, Dido is so sympathetic.
Right.
Honestly, you can't imagine Dido murdering Ascanius.
No. But I think in the last episode we were talking, Aeneas's kind of cold farewell speech to Dido is very much Jason speaking to Medea.
Yes.
So I think that aspect of it. But right, in terms of temperament, in terms of
what they're capable of.
Yeah, Medea doesn't kill herself.
No. Medea kills her own children,
right.
whereas Dido doesn't seem to have any desire to harm anyone but herself. I mean, she has an initial desire to harm Aeneas, but that's a kind of passing rage.
Right.
It doesn't bear fruit.
Right.
And then Ariadne is simply the abandoned woman.
Yeah, right.
Abandoned by Theseus on the island.
But she's picked up by Dionysus, and she's not really a figure that's kind of fleshed out in terms of fluctuating from revenge thoughts to sympathy to suicide.
She's just an object of pity, nothing else.
Right.
There's really no heroism, I would say, in her actions and behavior, except maybe the curse. Right, she does throw a curse on Theseus's ship.
Oh, that's true.
As Theseus is sailing back to Athens.
Right, which Dido does.
She does, in a very similar way. The other figure that occurred to me was Arachne. So Arachne has a suicide by hanging, but I don't know if she is really generally considered a tragic heroine.
Right.
It seems like it's almost another type of story.
Right. It's almost kind of she's an archetype. Someone's good at something, brags that that she or she is better at the god or goddess of that something.
Right.
Tragedy ensues.
Simple hubris, not any family conflict.
Right. So I guess the squishy answer would be that Dido is a broad composite of many. Pick your favorite tragic heroine, and you can find her in Dido.
Right.
But what Vergil intended, perhaps of course we'll never know. But I thought too, as I read Edgeworth's quote, is that Cleopatra, especially given how much of kind of contemporary Roman history is layered into the Aeneid, it would be shocking that Cleopatra would not be a model for Dido, at least somewhere in this epic, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but we'll see. We'll get to Edgeworth's answer to this later on, and I think it's a really interesting one.
Yep.
Intriguing, if not fully persuasive.
Not fully persuaded.
We'll see.
We'll have to see.
Yep. So where should we begin, Dave?
Well, I think we need a quick recap.
Yeah, we do.
Not a nightcap, not at this time of day, but a quick recap of where we are in the story, in case listeners are just coming in at this point.
Yeah, well, I was gone for a week, and the bright Michigan sun was kind of frying my brain on the beach. So I'm having a little trouble kind of remember, where did we leave off? It was Aeneas had just left. Is that where we left it?
Yes.
Okay.
The second appearance of Mercury.
That's right.
The second appearance of Mercury to Aeneas, saying, "Well, why are you dawdling? She's about to burn things down. Get out." Mm-hmm. And Dido is deceiving her sister Anna, and the funeral pyre is constructed on the very top, on the arcs, the citadel of the city of Carthage. Mm-hmm. And Aeneas and his men are down in the harbor. We've had the terrible speeches between the two protagonists, in which Dido says, no goddess birthed you. Everyone throughout this epic, Dido says, is calling you goddess born, right? Not Dea, O born of the goddess. But really, you were sired by some Hyrcanian tigress or some Caucasus mountain. You're born out of a cliff.
Right, made of flint.
Yeah, suckled by a tigress. So you have that kind of tiger's blood in your veins. You're a monster to treat me this way.
Do you think that in some ways there's a slight reference to Romulus and Remus? Romans is raised by wild animals.
Could be.
I mean, it's just completely just coming off the top of my head, right?
Except it could be. Except that's generally considered a very good thing,
Right.
And so I'm not sure.
Okay.
It would be interesting for Dido to express it that way. It would be interesting for Vergil to put those words in her mouth because it is 400 years before Romulus and Remus.
Right.
So then it would be odd. It would be almost too convenient for her to say, it's like you were sired by a wolf.
Right.
Right? Because he's the great ancestor of Romulus and Remus.
Exactly.
Aeneas is.
Yeah.
So that has some plausibility.
Yeah.
And then they part ways with Aeneas basically in his extreme passivity, according to Brooks-Otis, giving almost no kind of answer whatsoever, nothing satisfying.
Right.
Completely having receded into the background.
Right. And so then I think that's kind of where I think we pick it up here. And from here to the end of the book, the camera, so to speak, is almost exclusively on Dido.
That's right.
We get a little bit of Aeneas, which is interesting where we find him and what he's doing. And it's maddening.
Right.
But it's almost wholly given over to Dido's fury.
That's right.
Yep.
She tells Anna to gather up all the stuff that Aeneas left behind and to burn it in a kind of fiery purging exercise.
Right. She lies to her sister saying, listen, I know this sorceress who can... cast a love spell or a hate spell, and this is part of what we need to do. And so she convinces Anna. She even says something like, I'd be the last one to resort to black magic, but what choice do I have? And Anna is the willing kind of stooge in this. And so she says, so she builds the pyre. And are you a fan of the show Friends?
I think I have seen perhaps 2.5 or 3 complete episodes.
Okay, so that's a no.
Well, I'm definitely not a fan.
Yeah.
I don't have any aversion to it.
Right.
It's just not something I ever watched.
Right. I was never a huge fan too. I always kind of found it mildly funny. But what this reminded me of, there's an episode where one of the women of the trio is going through a bad breakup and isn't able to move on. And so the other two recommend to her, what you need to do is gather up everything, all the letters, all the if you have flowers, you have gifts, we'll put them in a big charcoal bin and we'll burn them up. And so kind of you purge it.
Right. And
so it struck me that this kind of that notion is not I don't think it's an uncommon one.
No, I think you're right.
Right.
You were just saying, Jeff, that you're ready for the semester to resume, to start again.
Yes.
Are you one of those individuals that either as a student or now as a teacher encourages students to purge their scholastic remnants, pile all of their notes and books and papers in a pile and torch them?
I am not.
You've never done that?
Well, no, I think it just comes from I'm kind of a bit of a pack rat by nature.
You are.
It's difficult for me to throw things away. So I still have notebooks from my undergrad days.
Really?
And I keep them more for kind of the doodles I made in the margins than the actual notes.
Than the content.
But I recognize the value in a purge. My wife is a purger.
I'm a purger. What's the opposite of a pack rat? I guess it'd be an Edgeworth. That's what I'm always doing.
Yeah.
I'd love to throw things away because I do not like the mental attachment, to things that might be unpleasant in some way. I'd rather only retain it in the pure distilled form in, the hallways of my mind.
So you're not a very sentimental guy.
I'm very sentimental.
How do those things work together?
I don't know. This is why I can't make sense of life.
You are Edgeworth.
I do save things for a long time, but then I take satisfaction in jettisoning them.
Yeah.
Or flotsoming them, one or the other.
Yeah.
And so students do this routinely. At the institution where we used to teach,
yes,
there was a course that you probably taught. I taught it many times. It had a number of different names. I think it was called Prelude at one point.
Yeah.
It may have been called...
Sepol.
Yeah, Topaz. It's just basically your first year seminar.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The students would, in a kind of ritual, because apparently they didn't like this course, some of them, they would, that's an understatement, they would have a kind of bonfire of the vanities.
Oh.
And they'd pile these all into it.
I had no idea.
Yes, a huge mound and torch it.
Really?
And I guess it's part of this theme. I don't think that getting rid of the material actually effaces the memory. It's not possible, right?
Right.
You can't burn it and therefore forget what's in your mind.
Right.
But maybe the satisfaction is, I've done something now that I'd like to do mentally, but I can't.
Yes.
So I do it physically.
Yes.
And that's a substitute.
Yes.
It's vicarious.
I guess so. Right. It's a way of kind of returning to zero in some sense. Like if I can't go back to square one in my mind, at least I can do it visually and physically with the things around me that I see. Right. I think that was, in some ways, that was, you talk about the bonfire of the vanities, what that refers to, of course, is Savonarola.
That's correct.
In Florence, right? Urging people to bring their luxuries into the piazza.
To which Botticelli contributed a couple of paintings.
I wake up in the middle of the night still kind of in cold sweat thinking about that.
Exactly, tossing and turning. Now, I admire Botticelli's commitment to his convictions. Apparently, he was not compelled to do that. He did it out of a genuine sense of moral rectitude.
That's my understanding, too.
But why did he have to ruin those things?
Exactly.
How about a pair of socks?
Exactly.
They're offensive in some way.
Right, exactly. That cloak that nobody else really liked anyway.
Correct.
Right.
Toss that, Botticelli.
So I think there are lots of manifestations of this kind of thing here. But I think someone burning something because of a relationship gone bad, I think that's. I read that.
Common.
I think that rings true.
Very much rings true.
Yep.
Have you ever done that?
I have not. I've been not because I hang on to things.
Right. You're the back rat.
Right. So I don't have like this box full of old, letters and such from
postcards
and such like that. But it's probably I didn't deliberately throw them away. They just kind of disappeared from one move to the next.
That happens.
Yeah. Right.
That happens.
Yeah. Hey, you want to read some Latin here?
I shall. I would really enjoy that. So this is line 509. 509, Book 4. Stant ardrae circet crinis e fusa sacerdos, ter centum tonat ordre Deos erabum quaceosque, tergemi nam quacetentria virginis ora dianae, sparsaret et latice simulatos fantis averni, falcibus et me sad lunam quae runtur a Aeneas, pubentes herbae negri cum lacta veneni.
Very nice.
I like that lacta veneni. With the milk of black poison.
Yes, my goodness. I want to talk more about this, but it also struck me reading this is that Vergil, if he were born today, he would be a filmmaker.
You think so?
Yes.
Oh, don't give in to the notion of the superiority of that genre.
I'm not saying that.
Sounds like it.
I'm saying that.
Those are your exact words,
right? I mean, I would put let's go there for a second. I would put I would rank a Hitchcock and
Coppola
and a Scorsese up with, right? No, you're just shaking your head over there.
It's a different genre.
Right. Well, I'm just saying
this is poetry.
Okay, I'm saying that if he had the choice, he would have been very good at that.
Agreed, completely.
The way that the language that he uses, the way he frames a scene, and as we'll see here, the way he balances his scenes strikes me as so cinematic.
Yes.
In the best,
I knew you were going to use that word.
The best possible use of that word.
Right, but think about this for a second.
Yep.
Why is it that the best poets are described as cinematic, whereas good movie makers are not described as poetic?
I think they sometimes are.
Really?
I think they sometimes are.
I think it means that we have subtly accepted the notion that visual imagery is superior to the spoken word.
I think that's culturally where we are right now, without a doubt. I think that's kind of a basic assumption. I think that people, as our culture goes forward, and as things become more and more digitized,
right?
People learn, experience, consume more visually than they do with a printed word.
If that's true, we're in trouble because this podcast, doesn't have a strong visual element.
No.
We gave it a go, and we'll probably give it a go again.
Yeah.
But right now, it's all the spoken word.
Right.
And that is supposed to be more evocative and descriptive because it interfaces with a person's imagination in a way that having the scenes and images created for you is arguably inferior. But we're probably off the topic a little bit.
I know we are, but can I say a couple more things?
Yes.
So an example that jumps into my mind is something like The Godfather, right? So which was a novel. Mario Puzo wrote The Godfather, and the film, which I think is inarguably one of the best, top 10 films made of all time, is a vastly superior product to the novel. Having read it and watched the film as an interpretation of that story goes well beyond that.
Okay,
but that might be again the exception.
But that's a different argument.
Okay,
so now you're comparing a really great movie to a mediocre to poor novel. You'd have to compare a really great movie to a really great piece of literature, or perhaps not compare them because they're apples and oranges belonging to different genres?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I think that. Well, let me kind of give another example. If we were dwelling in the realm of genre, for example, one of the things I love horror films, and I think I really like horror stories, written horror stories, which I think is an incredibly difficult genre to master and to be effective at. And so I'm currently reading a novel which falls under the category of horror, and it's very, very good. But my experience is it's very, very rare because I think horror is at its best. It's kind of designed as a visual medium. And it's as written horror is almost impossible to pull off in an effective way.
You've read Sophocles, right? He's a master of the macabre.
Macabre and horror they're different.
What?
Yes, right?
Okay.
So I wouldn't call Oedipus Rex a horror story.
No.
There's
deeply disturbing elements of graphic description that are both morally and in terms of the imaginative effect, deeply disturbing.
Deeply disturbing, but I think being disturbing doesn't make it horror. I mean, when I say horror, I mean something that's kind of dwells in the uncanny, that dwells in kind of the unsettlingness that you can't quite put your finger on, and I'm forced to say it, the liminal, and that.
Nobody forced you to say that.
But I feel like I'm kind of expected to say it every episode now. And so I think so in terms of like genre, I would say that film over written horror as a general rule, just because of the demands of the genre. All right.
So why then, maybe we got an answer to this question, why are good filmmakers not described as poetic? Wouldn't say that was a poetic scene, but the best poets are described as cinematic.
Again, I'm not sure that's true.
All right.
That's true. I mean, I couldn't give an example, but I know that filmmakers have been deciding the framing and organizing a scene as poetic.
Do you have a preference for your own imagination to that of others?
Generally speaking, yes.
Yeah. So why would you want to see what you read in a book portrayed on a screen?
Well, if it's done by somebody that I respect, like
whose imaginative qualities you respect,
exactly,
in particular,
right? I would have to say that the films that I like the best aren't the ones that are based on existing literature.
So you do recognize a distinction in genres there.
I do. So I think my favorite film of all time is Coppola's Apocalypse Now, right? Which was not a book, right? And it comes from kind of the fevered imagination of Coppola and a couple of other guys. And I find the way when I watch that film, and I've watched it 50 times, that story as a book. I mean, it's loosely based on Heart of Darkness, which is a
Joseph Conrad.
It's a door stopper of a novella. It's very difficult to read. But if that story were told and written, kind of as it is, with the dialogue and such, and the organization of those scenes, it would not work. It has to be told visually.
Yeah.
So
my final comment doesn't have to be the final comment to this, but just my final comment is my chief complaint against the aesthetics of modernity is the ignoring of genres.
The ignoring of genres. Mm-hmm. Okay, now we can't just leave that there.
Poetry is poetry. Film is film. Philosophy is philosophy. I like these distinct categories, and never the twain shall meet.
Never the twain shall meet.
Never the twain shall meet.
Right. So you don't find you haven't seen anything kind of philosophical in this poem that we're reading so far?
Okay, you got me. There are philosophical discussions, but predominantly it's a work of imagination.
Yes.
And it's meant to evoke a certain kind of feeling, moral and aesthetic within me, whose goal is not to condition me to better ethical behavior or knowledge of myself.
Okay.
It's to give me delight in a certain way.
Yes. Right.
Whereas I think the genre of film, as much as I enjoy it, is largely a substitute for imagination. Which is why I find it a lazy pleasure.
I gotcha. Right.
You know what I'm saying?
And I would say that it reminds me of, when I listen to a radio station, 97.4, we play it all.
Right.
I hear that as a threat because 95% of all is horrible.
Yeah.
Right. And I think with film too, like horror, it's very, very difficult to do it very well. So I think there are on the grand scheme, very few films worth seeing. So I think we're actually in agreement there.
Yeah, you're always going for agreement. You're probably right. We may be talking past each other a little bit.
All right. Let me translate those lines.
Can you?
Yes.
Let's hear what Stan has to say there.
This is what Mr. Lombardo translates. There were altars around the courtyard, and the priestess shook her hair out free and chanted thunderous prayers to 300 gods, to Erebus and Chaos, to three-bodied Hecate and Diana's three faces, Virgin Huntress, Moon, and pale Proserpina. She sprinkled water as being from Avernus, and with a bronze knife harvested by moonlight, herbs selected for their milky black poison. She calls for the love charm of a newborn foal, torn from his forehead before his mother can eat it. Dido herself, sacred cakes of barley in her pious hand, stands close to the altars, 1 foot unsandaled, her dress unbound.
That's frightening, isn't it?
It is frightening, and it strikes me as that, in some ways, her deceit to Anna about the sorceress is really only kind of a half lie, because it's basically kind of the priestess is doing kind of the black magic
That's
right here,
correct.
right? Yeah. And it also struck me too, as we've talked in a numerous of these Aeneid episodes, how about the central characters are very concerned with doing things that are ritually and religiously correct.
Correct.
So if she's going to go out by suicide, she's going to do it the right way.
Yeah, by the numbers.
And then I thought Vergil follows this up with, and here's where I think where the whole kind of cinematic thing came from.
Okay.
From my mind, he immediately contrasts these lines with this kind of telescopes out, the camera moves out. He gives a view of kind of all nature, what's happening at the same time that Dido is wrapped in this passion, and this is again Lombardo.
Right, but if I may.
Yeah.
Okay. This is where Vergil's superior, because he did all of this without thinking about cameras, and there was no language or terminology for how would I portray this in a visual way. This is all his imagination suggesting to you how you ought to imagine it. That's the really interesting hookup.
I agree, but also remember back when Aeneas first arrives at Carthage, one of the first things he encounters is kind of a film strip of everything that happened at Troy. I think Vergil is very interested in visual depictions of narrative. Now, of course, he doesn't think of them in terms of film and camera, right?
Right.
But he's very interested in the power of visual images to tell a story. We'll see that when Dido climbs into her funeral pyre, she takes with her, I'd be interested to see what the Latin is here, but one of the things she carries with her is a picture of Aeneas.
Right.
So she have like the little wallet size, right? And so
Aeneas' high school photo. Yeah.
Exactly.
He's probably wearing a varsity jacket. He's probably like a 4-sport letter athlete, right?
Yeah, most likely to
I don't know.
completely mess things up.
No,
right?
most likely to found a civilization.
Right. So I think that, you're obviously right that he's not thinking in terms of what we would think of film today, but I think he's very interested in the power of visuals to tell a story.
Okay.
All right.
I interrupted you.
Sure.
And I'll do so again.
Okay. So
when Vergil's right now.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, please.
When Vergil's describing like the seashore, right? The sand on the seashore, it lay there as the waves lapped against it. That conjures in your mind a different, though similar image than it conjures in my mind.
Explain.
Well, we have come from quite different backgrounds, right? You've seen beaches and shores and the content of your imagination, although similar enough to mine that when Vergil says seashore, we get a similar idea, divergent in every other way, right? So that's the power of the written word to evoke imagination. Whereas if this is put on screen, now we are seeing exactly the same thing.
Okay.
We're seeing exactly the same thing. And my argument is that that's limiting in some way.
Yeah, I will completely buy that. Right. The power that literature has is that it becomes something new in the mind of every person that hears or reads it.
Exactly.
Right.
Well said.
Right. Now, I think that, film too can have wildly different interpretations, but in terms of kind of what you're experiencing, it's leveling.
You're right.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, totally.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we do agree.
We do agree.
All right.
But Vergil, so right after that very kind of hot and kind of disturbing description, he writes, "It was night, and all over earth weary bodies lay peacefully asleep. Woods and wild seas had fallen still, and the stars were midway in their gliding orbits. Ox and meadow were quiet, and all the brilliant birds who haunt the lapping lakes and tangled hedgerows were nestled in sleep under the dark, silent sky."
That is so beautiful.
So there's also, you often will see that notion in literature of kind of the, I forget what the term is, when nature kind of imitates what's happening on Earth. Like if somebody's raging down, on Earth or going through pain, it's stormy, right?
I see.
I can forget the term here.
I don't know the exact term.
But in Vergil here does the exact opposite. So it's like nature doesn't care.
It's also intended to have an effect on us. It's a lull.
Yeah.
You can't maintain, I don't think, you can't maintain this kind of excited frenzy, fear, and anxiety about Dido's fate for hundreds of lines.
Yes.
You have to have a lull in the action.
Exactly.
It's like you can't have the chorus all the time.
Right. You know what else it's like?
It's a bridge.
Yeah. It's also like the baptism scene in The Godfather. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I do.
So
the juxtaposition of the killing and the
yes,
the
that's
baptism.
exactly what this is.
Yeah, except they're not happening at the same time, are they? It's alternation.
Well, no, I think they are. We're meant to see kind of
in the movie, but you're saying here in the
we're saying because nature is placid, while Dido is in hysteria.
Do you take from that the idea that Vergil is telling us nature is indifferent, or the world moves on while individuals have their crises, moments of terrible suffering?
I mean, I think that's one way you could interpret this, is that Vergil could be saying that the business of human beings is very, very small in the grand scheme of things. But I don't think that's what he's doing. I think he's doing exactly what you were saying in terms of the lull. It's the kind of the jerking us to something completely different. That is, he's tangling with our emotions, and he does it for that very kind of personal effect.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of lulls, jerking people's emotions and tangling.
Yeah. What are you talking about?
It's time for the ads.
All right. This episode of Ad Nauseam is brought to you by Ratio Coffee. Dave, this morning I had my Ratio 8 queued up from the night before. I just hit the button, and within probably about 12, 13 minutes, I had the perfect cup of coffee. And I've had several coffee machines that I've owned before. I've had, Senior Cafe and
Dak and Blecker,
the ones with the scorch pad that we talked about. And never in my life have I had a cup of coffee brewed at home that good.
No,
it was fantastic. Yeah. So Ratio Coffee is this company that's been with us for a very long time.
That's right.
We got it's Mr. Mark Hellwig.
That's correct.
He's the mastermind out there in Portland, Oregon.
That's right. I was on the phone with him a couple of weeks ago.
How's he doing?
He's doing great.
Yes.
He's doing great. We were talking about coffee and talking a little bit about his trajectory as an entrepreneur and entrepreneur. Nah, there's nothing there.
No, bruneur. I like it.
Bruneur.
Go with it. Yes.
It's got the brew and it's newer.
Right. Both good things. Yes.
How much he loves making coffee and everything coffee related. How much he has learned in the process. The listener probably doesn't know, but Mark spent quite a while researching high-level Italian espresso machines and other kinds of coffee makers before he designed the Ratio 8.
Man.
And so he is a purveyor of brilliant espresso machines, but he thought, how come the home brew coffee maker hasn't really evolved in our lifetimes? Well, now it has. He has invented this automatic pour-over machine. Delivers a very consistent, delicious cup of coffee.
It does, right? I wish I thought like that, to see kind of a need.
You did.
A gap in the
you
culture.
did.
Where did I see that?
You said that there are lots of podcasts, but there currently is no podcast with two chuckleheads who have some tenuous friendship discussing classics in a haphazard way.
That's right.
And we filled that niche.
We filled that niche. So I am kind of like, we're kind of like Mark Hellwig.
We filled that niche like delicious coffee, filling the borosilicate hand-blown glass carafe.
There we go. Way to tie that together.
Thank you.
I like that. So, listeners, if you want to own one of these beautiful machines, the Ratio 6 or its older, slightly fancier brother, the Ratio 8, you can go to ratiocoffee.com and you can click on one, or if you're so inclined, both of those machines. And for the remainder of August, if you type in ANCO7C, 7C, or if you're listening to this in September, ANCOV4, that coupon code will get you, I believe, 15% off either machine.
Right. Yeah, I had a great cup of coffee, several cups of coffee from my Ratio 8 this morning. And so simple. I usually queue everything up, press that one button to get it started.
Yep.
I go, to take care of other tasks. I come back, piping hot, delicious, sweet coffee. No harsh CO2. It's all been off-gassed.
That's right.
Is waiting right there for me in the hulking flagon.
Yeah, so check it out, listeners. You will not regret it.
That's correct. This episode of Ad Nauseam is also brought to you by Hackett Publishing, Hackett Publishing.com, with offices in, is it Vermont and Ohio?
No. We're talking Indianapolis, Indiana, and Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Cambridge, and Indianapolis in.
Yes.
And what have these folks been doing for now 50 years?
Well, they have been publishing accessible, erudite, affordable translations of not just the classics, but from every corner of academia that you could think of, history, culture, religion, mythology, folklore. They do it all, and I can't recommend them highly enough. The translation of Stanley Lombardo's Aeneid, which we've been using throughout these episodes, is it the Cresac?
Yes, Len Cresac.
Also comes from Hackett Publishing.
That's right.
Whatever you want under the realm of academia, or if you're just looking for a great, affordable translation of something from the classical realm, you're going to find it at hackettpublishing.com.
That's right. I'm at the website right now, and I'm looking at a handsome volume, Classics in Western Philosophy of Art.
Yes.
By Noel Carroll, Major Themes and Arguments. So we've been discussing quite a bit of aesthetics here in our amateur way. Mm-hmm. But if you want to know something about the philosophy of art, you might want to pick up this volume by Noel Carroll, Major Themes and Arguments. Right next to it is The Essential Greek Historians. So you have a comparison of individuals like Herodotus and Thucydides, Plutarch and Polybius. This is by Stanley Burstein. I think this is going to be a big seller for them because this really scratches an itch people have for Greek history and then some understanding of the development of the genre.
Yeah, and it's in the books they have are going to find, you'll find that their most budgets are going to be able to accommodate them. So one of the big problems, as you and I both well know, with academic publishing is that these volumes will often only come out in hardback.
They're hugely expensive.
You'll find them only in libraries, and if you want to buy them for your own personal library, you're talking $200, $300 for a
these. There's a Dutch publisher I won't mention, but everybody knows whom I'm speaking of.
I know who you're talking about. Yes.
$300 minimum. Now, they put out good stuff, but who can afford that?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly right. But Hackett is, they're a publisher for the people.
That's right. So the Essential Greek Historians, I'm looking at the page here. Mm-hmm. You can get a cloth version, $62, a paper version for $20. See, that's a great deal. And we have a coupon code, don't we, Jeff?
We do. So if you go to hackettpublishing.com, find what you want, you type in the code AN2022, their 50th year anniversary year, you're going to get a couple of great things. 20% off your entire order and free shipping. You're not going to find that on that other website named after a giant river.
That's right. Check it out.
And finally, this episode is brought to you by, what are we talking about here?
Come on, Jeff.
The Moss Method.
Moss Method.
Yeah, tell us about the Moss Method.
Well, we're running a special sale, 10% off right now. It began this Monday, August 15. You want to go to mossmethod.com, check out a lot of my free instruction where I talk about the New Testament, I talk about Plato, I talk about Xenophon, a whole range of authors. And if you like the free instruction and you want to go from not too good to pretty good.
No, but its better phrase is neophyte to erudite. Yes.
Neophyte to erudite. Mm-hmm. Then you can sign up for the course.
Yes.
It's divided into 4 modules. Module 1, regular $325, $325, 10% off sale running now. It includes 40 instructional videos. It includes 40 lessons, 6 quizzes, 2 exams, lots of additional material. There really is no reason not to learn Greek through this course.
Now, tell them about the Moffus Hours, though.
Well, the Moffus Hours, I know this is your favorite, is on Friday, and I convene these Moffus Hours, and students from all over the world, all over the United States and other places in this world, we gather together for an hour. I answer any questions they have about Greek. We read and translate together. We talk about literature. It's a really good time.
Fantastic. So mossmethod.com.
That's correct. All right, Jeff, so as we get right back into it, where is Dido psychologically now in the story?
She's all over the place, right? I find this one of the things that's very, I think in many ways, very realistic. She does not come off as cartoonish or cliched here. This is, Vergil again taps into a woman in extreme distress, and it's very believable. And so she has kind of this one last moment of what I like to describe as kind of Hamlet-like wavering.
Hamlet.
To be or not to be, right?
Is this the Kenneth Branagh edition?
It could be.
Do you like that one?
I like that one.
Okay.
I mean, there's also the Mel Gibson one, right?
Mel Gibson played Hamlet?
He did, yes, yeah. It wasn't bad.
I don't remember.
Right. And so she's contemplating, of course, suicide, but she's saying, should I should I do this? Should I not do this? Maybe I should, go to one of those former suitors that, made a decent offer to me. Maybe I should load up the ships and chase after the Trojans. And should in thoughts of either attacking them or saying, hey, can we come along too? Right. And so she said, but, could I ever, convince my people kind of to pack up and move again? And one of the things in this time reading through the Aeneid, one of the things I really took away from it is I always had kind of this assumption that Dido was kind of this commanding queen, and everybody kind of followed her, and we're kind of all on board. But this most recent reading shows me is that kind of her hold on things is fairly shaky, right? It seems, I think Vergil seems to suggest that a lot of the Tyrians aren't exactly on board with the whole project,
right? Or
maybe since she met Aeneas, the whole thing kind of ground to a halt. But when she talks about convincing them to come in the first place was almost impossible. Could I ever do it again? But of course, ultimately she falls on the choice. No, I've chosen death, and this is what I have to do
to end it all.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And then Mercury appears, right, to Aeneas. And
again.
Yes. Yeah. I referenced this. Yeah. And what is Aeneas doing while Dido is having this turmoil?
He's up in the stern catching a nap.
You're kidding me.
Yeah, good time to kind of doze off and take a break.
Completely detached from the anguish of the woman he once loved?
Yes. Yeah, and completely detached from what his men are doing and what he told them to do. What do you make of this? What are we supposed to think about Aeneas doing this in this moment?
I like the interpretation we referenced in previous episodes that for the sake of the storyline, Aeneas has to recede into the background. Vergil writes him out of the story temporarily. He has no agency, no drive. He's not moving along the action, not because the way he has been portrayed previously makes that impossible,
right?
But because Dido has to be at the front of the stage.
Yeah. So
Aeneas recedes.
Yeah, I like that too. I mean, this episode reminded me of two episodes from antiquity, and I'm not arguing that Vergil had either of them in mind. One he couldn't have had in mind because it happened after him. But it reminded me of Odysseus sleeping with the bag of winds.
Okay.
Right, and he doesn't tell his men about it, and his men say, "Oh, what's he got in there?
Right.
He's trying to pull one over us," and they open the bag, and that doesn't work as kind of a comparandum. Now, the other scene that it reminded me is of Jesus with the disciples in the Sea of Galilee when the storm's brewing. And they're freaking asleep out, and he's having a nap, right? That also doesn't work as a comparandum. So because I think the moral behind either of those stories, what it says about the character behind the sleeping figures in those stories, is so different than what's happening with Aeneas here. It's detachment. It's fading into the wallpaper. That's what's going on here.
For Aeneas, you're saying.
For Aeneas, yes, exactly. Right. So for Christ, it kind of shows kind of his command of the situation, right? He's not troubled by the storms because he commands the storms. Mm-hmm. With Odysseus, maybe you could argue that it's a detachment from his men.
But he doesn't care for them.
He doesn't care about them.
Correct.
Right. But Aeneas seems to have
he's got no excuse.
He's got no excuse. Right. It makes it so odd. So the argument about that he must fade.
Right.
I think that's the most persuasive here. Yeah.
So what does Mercury say when he appears to Aeneas here in the dream?
So again, he tells him, get off your duff. You got to get out of here. Dido is going crazy, and it's striking that Mercury says, go deal with that. He says, no, Dido's done. But if this gets out of hand, that fire is going to find the ships. So you better get up and get out of there. And he describes Dido famously as, and again, this is Lombardo, as a woman, as a fickle and worrisome thing.
Yes.
You want to distance yourself from.
That's right. So varium et mutabile, something like that.
Yeah.
I think is the Latin.
Right. And we talked about this. Again, this is getting ahead of things, but the woman that he ultimately winds up with, Lavinia. Mm-hmm. She's not a fickle and worrisome thing. She's kind of a nothing.
That's right.
Kind of a cipher.
Exactly.
Right.
She's a blank page.
Yep. So finally, Aeneas takes the hint, and he leaps out of bed, cuts the cable, and they start to push their ships out of the harbor. Right?
They got a paddle boat with like a swan on the prow.
I like picturing that.
Yeah.
You ever been in a paddle boat?
Yes.
And, the harder you paddle, the slower you go.
The slower you go.
Exactly.
Right.
Any panicked pedaling won't get you anywhere.
It's a lot of fun.
Right.
You see the evocative nature of the spoken word.
Very, very nice.
Okay.
Right? Now, about 20 years ago, I had the privilege of going to Carthage You've not been there, have you?
No,
to ancient Carthage?
no, I haven't been to Tunisia. I haven't been to Tatooine.
Listen.
I haven't been to all of the places where Augustine of Hippo, hippoed.
Right, exactly right. You will get there one day.
Okay.
But the ancient site of Carthage, its Acropolis, so to speak. The arcs in some ways that we're talking
the
about
citadel.
here. If you look down just the slope, the ancient harbor of Carthage is you can still see the outline of it. And so when Vergil talks about Dido up on the citadel watching the fleet going out, it's
picturesque.
It's picturesque, and I don't know if Vergil ever went to Carthage.
There's no reason to think he didn't. It was a common trip.
I suppose so. I mean,
it was all pacified Roman territory by his lifetime.
The way he describes this, when I think of myself standing on the citadel and looking down, I say, "Oh yeah, exactly."
Sure.
Yeah.
But there were maps. There were plenty of persons he could have asked.
Yes. Right.
But I wouldn't doubt he visited.
Right.
Did you see Aeneas's Crocs along the shore somewhere?
His Crocs that he left behind.
He was in a big hurry,
Exactly. There's a set of Crocs down there that people claim
were Aeneas's.
Right.
Is he go with the camouflage Crocs, or what's the choice for Aeneas?
They were glittery, as I remember. Exactly.
Tyrian purple, probably.
Right. With the sparkles.
But Dido sees the fleet.
Yep.
And then she has another Volte-Face.
She does.
To use the German. And her thoughts turn to revenge.
Right. And so again, emotionally, she's all over the map.
Can I read some of this, Lombardo?
Yeah, please do.
Or did you want to?
No, go ahead. I've dominated that part.
Okay, so then Dido says, "Oh God," she said, "will he get away? Will this interloper make a mockery of us? To arms, the whole city after him. Launch the fleet, bring fire, man the oars. What am I saying? Where am I? What has come over me? Oh, Dido, only now. Do you feel your guilt? Better to have felt it when you gave away your crown. Behold the pledge, the loyalty of the man, they say, bears his ancestral gods. Bore on his shoulders his age-worn father. Could I have not torn him limb from limb and fed him to the fishes?
Wow.
Murdered his friends." Yeah. See, now she goes again crazy.
Yes.
"Minced Ascanius himself and served him up as a meal to his father." So there we have the banquet of Atreus.
Exactly.
The sons of Atreus and Thyestes, right? Atreus, the father of Agamemnon and Menelaus, and caught his brother Thyestes in adultery, and so killed the children of Thyestes.
But not only that,
served
them up as
right.
main course, right?
The battle could have gone either way, Dido says. What of it? Doomed to die, whom did I have to fear? I should have torched his camp with my own hands, annihilated father and son and the whole race, and thrown myself on top of the conflagration.
Now, what do you make of this? Is this just kind of tragic hyperbole?
Yes.
Okay, this is not something that we're supposed to imagine. Well, if Dido had wanted to do that, she could have gotten away with that.
Well, maybe she could have gotten away with it, because I do think that Aeneas and his men are very vulnerable in that position.
True.
But the reason that I think it's just tragic hyperbole is that Dido has thus far shown no instincts like this.
Yeah.
Medea, compared to Medea, by the time she gets to killing her children in Corinth,
she's already dismembered so many people.
Committed multiple crimes.
Very good point.
All along the way. She killed her own brother, Absyrtus, I think his name is.
Yep.
Scattered him on the waves. She killed Peleus, Jason's wicked Jason's wicked uncle, by throwing him into the boiling cauldron, chopping him up. She also killed the bronze guy, Talos, on the island of Crete. So Medea has a track record of brutality, which makes Jason's confidence in her ridiculous.
Right.
Of course she's going to respond that way. Dido has no prior violence on her record, right?
Yeah.
She fled Pygmalion and the troubles of Tyre. So I think this is ranting and raving. That's why I find her character more sympathetic.
Yeah.
She's not ultimately a villain. A villainess.
Yeah. And if we were talking in our previous episode about, I think one of the theories I offered of explaining kind of Aeneas's problem is that Vergil keeps putting him into the shoes of other kind of recognizable heroes, and he's got to find his own story. And so here Dido, I think, has the same kind of problem. In this composite of tragic heroines that she appears to be, she too can't find a center. She can't find her own persona, and so for her, the only way out is death. Yeah. And Aeneas escapes that because fate is pushing him towards his own story.
That's right.
Yeah. So this scene really struck me as very reminiscent of Polyphemus, watching Odysseus sail away.
Really?
And
say more about that,
in
if you would.
In the lines that come next, where when Dido curses, right? And so remember, Polyphemus curses Odysseus. He says, hear me, Poseidon, hear me, Father.
Right.
He says, what I really want is Odysseus to drown, to be destroyed, his ships to die. He says, but if that's not possible, then may he arrive home alone and having lost everything.
Yeah.
And that's the part of the curse that works. And so here too, Dido has a similar kind of thing. She has these, this is what I really want, but if that can't happen, then at least this. And it's a curse that I think that indeed follows Aeneas. Part of her curse. Well, I'll just read it here.
Do we want to get some Latin in there first?
Yeah, let's get some
okay?
Latin here. Let's do that.
Okay, this is from line 659. Dixitatos impressatoro moriemur in ultae, sed moriamura et sic iuat irdra sabumbras, haudriat hunc oculis ignem crudelis ab alto, dardanas et nostrae cum ferat omnia mortis.
Very nicely done.
Thank you.
So we have here, Dido climbs atop the pyre, and she says, Dido spoke, and pressing her face into the couch, we will die unavenged, but we will die. This is how I want to pass into the dark below. The cruel Trojan will watch the fire from the sea and carry with him the omens of my death. And with these words on her lips, her companions saw her collapse onto the sword, saw the blade foaming with blood and her hands spattered. A cry rises to the roof, and rumor dances wildly through the shaken town. The houses ring with lamentation and the wails of women. Great dirges hang in the air. It was as if Carthage itself, or ancient Tyre, had fallen to the enemy, and flames rolled through the houses of men and over the temples of the gods. So I think that's imagery is striking, is that what people are hearing, what they're doing, what they're seeing, it looks like not that the Trojans have fled, but that they've taken it by violence.
Right.
But it's in some ways it's the same kind of thing, right?
Like Troy.
Like Troy. Yeah, all over again.
Yes.
Yep.
Isn't this a fairly typical female suicide? I mean, a fairly atypical female suicide? Are you going to bring Edgeworth back in here?
Yeah. So if listeners will remember the opening quote, Edgeworth was saying the Pyre thing is odd because most female suicides they hang themselves or they're poisoned.
Right.
But climbing on a pyre and certainly stabbing oneself is atypical. So Edgeworth's answer to this,
it's a soldier's death.
Well, I guess so. I mean, it reminded me when I read this before I even looked up Edgeworth. It kind of sounded like Lucretia,
right?
So it's just
to fill in the audience on Lucretia. This is the wife of Collatinus at the founding of the Republic. So we're talking 510, 509 BC, and she's outraged by Tarquinius Superbus, right, the son of the tyrant, and then she takes her own life,
right,
by stabbing herself.
Right. So that struck me as okay. Vergil wants us to connect Dido's death with someone like Lucretia. Roman women, in many, if you compare them to like Greek women, in some ways the way that they act, not always, I think it's by far the exception, but they act in a much more kind of masculine fashion when it comes down to this kind of stuff.
Right.
So maybe what Vergil wants to see Dido as a kind of Lucretia or a kind of, it's a Roman death.
She's more stoic. She's a female version of Caesar,
yes,
or a female version of Cato the Younger, something like that.
Exactly right. Which that strikes me as very persuasive. Edgeworth's answer is he went to Polybius, the Roman historian, and looked at episodes in the Punic Wars.
Okay,
and he zeroed in on the death of Hasdrubal's wife, Hasdrubal, a general and king of
the brother
Carthage.
of Hannibal.
Yes, exactly. And the way that she dies in kind of this raving, passionate fashion, and also builds her own funeral pyre and dies by stabbing, which I had never known.
How come I didn't know this either?
No, I never read that passage in Polybius.
We're a couple of ignorami, apparently.
Or if I did, I'd never made that kind of connection.
Huh.
The article also says that passage is there's lots of gaps. So he's kind of filling in the blanks as well. Maybe one of the reasons that
with his imagination.
Well, I mean,
speculation. What's he filling it in with?
He's reconstructing the text, and he's
a little putty,
a little spackle here and there. But he's taking kind of key pieces and kind of reconstructing the scene, and it's persuasive. But he says that's what Vergil would have expected his audience to think of. And I think that's very interesting.
It is.
Dido almost, foreshadowing the death of a Carthaginian queen hundreds of years later.
Yes, a well-known Carthaginian queen.
Yes.
Who died as part of the conflict in some way between Rome and Carthage.
Right.
Adds another layer of interest.
Yeah. So I found that aspect of it very, very, very persuasive. And I think and very much more specific than just saying, Dido is expressing kind of a Roman way of killing oneself.
Right.
I thought as his argument was more persuasive and more interesting along those lines.
Right.
Yeah.
And as we come to the very end of the book,
yes,
Juno plays a role here.
Yeah.
If you remember that, Juno has pity on poor Dido as she's dying there on the funeral pyre and dispatches Iris,
yes,
the
right.
all-purpose goddess of the rainbow and messenger. To do what exactly?
Well, she comes down to kind of complete the final rite to cut.
That's correct.
To cut the hair.
Yes, to cut a lock of hair. So if I could just read the last 4 lines of the book. We're finally going to finish it this episode, Jeff.
Yes, my goodness.
Line 701 through 705, and then maybe you can give us Lombardo.
Yeah.
De valadet supra caput astitit hunc ego diti, sacrum iusaferote quisto corpora salvo, sic aedet dextra crinem secat omnis et una, dilapsus calor atquin ventos vita recessit.
And thus ends book 4.
That's right. And Lombardo says?
Lombardo says, with a quote here, "This offering I consecrate to this underworld and release you from your body." As soon as she had cut the lock, all the body's warmth ebbed away and Dido's life withdrew into the winds. Yeah. Which is strikingly, again, getting way ahead of things.
Similar?
Strikingly similar to the very last line.
The end of the whole epic and the death of Turnus.
Yes, right. Which I think is not accidental and is an argument that this is a finished work.
That's a great point.
Yep.
And we'll have to spend quite a bit of time on both Vergil's Nachleben, and to use the French, and also the puzzling final scene of the death of Turnus at the end of Book 12.
Yes, one of my favorites because it's so maddening,
Right.
And it leads you in so many different directions.
Dare I say it's liminal?
It is liminal. We should probably get to that maybe somewhere in 2024.
Yeah, I would say.
This is becoming the odd Aeneid podcast.
What? Not the ad nauseum, but the I got
That's
it.
right. But
Very
it's,
nice.
It's totally worth it.
Yep.
But we're up against it, Dave.
We are.
Yeah, we got to get out of here.
Let's do that.
Right. So before we leave, we got some people to thank. Who would you like to thank?
I would like to thank myself for developing this Latin program called
Oh, yeah.
The
The LLPSI?
The LLPSI.
Tell us a little bit about that, would you?
Right. So if you go to latinperdiem.com/LLPSI, you can sign up for my Latin course, which takes you ab initio, right from the very beginning. You can study Latin with me. We have 25 video lessons available where I'm interacting with charming live students, as well as many, many office hours recorded. So you can start out with the Lingua Latina per se illustrata, Hans Orberg's famous book, and start learning Latin today. It's inductive, it's careful, take lots of notes. It's also inexpensive.
Fantastic.
$199. Does that get you a cup of coffee, at your local bar stocks?
Right.
I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah. So where do they go to find that again?
latinperdiem.com/LLPSI.
All right.
We do need to thank some people.
We do. As always,
Mishka.
Dear Mishka, for putting this all together.
Yes. Sometimes works on a compressed schedule.
Man, it's amazing how she can turn that thing around.
But does it with brilliance. Makes
does.
it sound good.
Yep. The great music you hear throughout.
Right.
Scott Van Zen, just that screaming, shredding guitar.
Yeah, I like that.
I like it. It also makes me very envious at
Yeah,
the same time.
melodic and bluesy. Well, he's got a course.
Does he?
The Scott Van Zen Guitar School. You can
check that
learn
out.
to play like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's never too late to start shredding.
No,
right?
it isn't.
Right. And Ken Tamplin.
Yes.
Him of the great voice and the Vocal Academy.
Yeah, and the fancy shirts.
Oh, man, that guy had the fashion.
Sartorial. That guy has some sartorial acumen.
He was born. I think that guy was born to be on stage.
I think so.
Yep.
You betcha.
And hey, if you want a shout out, if you want to try to rival the great shout out that Father Pelican got at the top of this episode, you should write to us. We want to hear from you.
Yeah, like Father Pelican, swoop down over the. I can't resist. Swoop down like Father Pelican over the placid seas of the podcast and scoop up in your bill your own shout out.
I was wondering when you were going to get around to the Pelican thing,
did
because
it.
I knew it was going to happen, right?
I did it.
So you should write. If you want to write to Dave, you can write to Dave at dave@adnauseam.com. Don't forget the V.
Or Jeff at adnauseam.com. Don't forget the V. Some shout outs are now rolling in, for which we're very grateful.
Fantastic. And next week, we're taking a little bit of a break.
We are.
From the Aeneid. What are we talking about?
We're going to talk about a famous article by a famous Renaissance scholar named Charles Trinkaus. It's from a collection called The Scope of Renaissance Humanism.
Okay.
And we're going to look particularly at the Renaissance view of the dignity of man.
Sounds fantastic.
You may be surprised.
Sounds a little bit heavy.
No, I don't think it'll be heavy.
Can we lighten it?
We'll keep it light.
All right.
But there'll be some levity and some gravity. It may be surprising to our audiences, but human beings have dignity. And we're going to talk about that next week. So tune in for episode 94.
Excellent. And Dave, I believe you have our gustatory parting shot.
I do. This is by the Chinese-American novelist Amy Tan. Have you ever read any Amy Tan?
I read kind of her big novel, her breakout one, which I can't remember what it is.
Like
30 years ago.
I haven't read it, but I understand she's very successful.
It was a very good book.
Yes, and here is the funny quote with which we'll take this out. Ms. Tan says, "I am a miserable cook, but an extremely talented eater."
Well done.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks.